Hello all and welcome to another episode of Social Psychology Explained. Today we're taking a look at Does the prospect of fulfilling belonging affect social responses to rejection? A conceptual replication attempt by Sunami, Nadzan, and Jaremka. It was published in the April 2019 issue of Social Psychological and Personality Science. If you'd like to read the article for yourself, check the description down below for a citation and link. And now I must do my YouTuber duty and tell you that if you like this channel and want to see it grow, you can help me appease the algorithm gnomes by liking and sharing this video, leaving a comment down below, and subscribing to the channel. Prior research has shown that when people experience acute social rejection, they respond in one of two ways. They either behave prosocially or antisocially. The next question then is, why do we see this divergence? Well, a popular theory in the literature is the prospect of fulfilling belonging hypothesis. In short, the hypothesis states that if, after rejection, an individual expects their next interaction partner to fulfill their need to belong, they behave prosocially. However, if they expect their next interaction partner to similarly reject them, they behave antisocially. Just to be clear, when psychologists use the term antisocial, we are referring to behavior that is anti-society or sociopathic, not super introverted. What we colloquially refer to as antisocial behavior is actually asocial. Now, while numerous studies have found support for the prospect of fulfilling belonging hypothesis, the authors of this paper argued that this prior work primarily consists of sample sizes that are far too small by today's standards. For example, one study used a 2x2 between subjects design with 49 participants. This means that each condition only had 9 or 10 people. By contrast, these days we like to have at least 20 to 30 per condition. As has been discussed at length in the wake of the ongoing replication crisis, small sample sizes are prone to false positive results. Put simply, we find an effect purely as an artifact of the people we happen to include in our study, not because the general population has this trend. Another term for this is sampling error. With all this in mind, Sunami Nadzan and Jaremka sought to do a properly powered conceptual replication in order to find better evidence for or against this hypothesis. They conducted a 2-day experiment in which on the first day, participants were shown the profile of another participant they would interact with the following lab visit. And on the second day, they underwent a rejection manipulation, followed by all the tasks, to see if prosocial or antisocial behavior would result from said rejection manipulation. In a true pro-gamer move, the authors hypothesized that the prospect of fulfilling belonging manipulation would cause participants to behave more prosocially or antisocially following the rejection manipulation, or it would not. In determining sample size, the authors did a power analysis in which they said the expected effect is quite small, and they wanted a 90% chance of detecting an effect. These parameters are considerably more conservative than you could argue they needed, but the upside is that they can be extra sure that whatever this experiment finds, said results are the real deal and not a false positive or false negative. They recruited a total of 674 participants, though only 605 completed day 2. A further 59 were excluded because they caught on to the study's real design, and 8 non-white participants were excluded because the authors were worried that having mixed-race interactions in the lab might confound the results. Do with that information what you will. On the first day, participants were told that they would do an in-person activity with another participant, and then they completed a survey to obtain demographic information and personal details for their participant profile. Participants then saw the profile of the other participant, who was in fact a Confederate. Half the participants saw a profile that matched their own alongside a pie chart showing that their profiles matched 80%. The other half saw a profile that differed from their own alongside a pie chart showing their profiles matched 20%. All participants saw a photo of the same race and gender as them. After the profile exchange, participants completed a short manipulation check in which they rated how compatible their partner was. They then saw the Confederates' responses to those same questions, and then the participants rated how much they felt the Confederate wanted to get to know them. 1 to 7 days later, participants came back to the lab, saw the Confederate's profile again, and were told that they would complete getting-to-know-you activities with their partner following a journaling task. In the rejection condition, participants wrote about a time they felt rejected in a non-romantic way by a person or group. In the control condition, participants wrote about their experience the previous morning. Following the journaling exercise, participants completed a rejection manipulation check adapted from the need-threat scale. The first getting to know you exercise was adapted from the famous Fast Friends manipulation. If you've heard of the 36 questions to make you fall in love with someone, that's the Fast Friends. Participants chose 5 questions from a list of 20 that ranged in self-disclosure and were told they used these questions for a self-disclosure activity at the end of their lab visit. The authors then added the self-disclosure scores for the 5 questions to calculate how self-disclosure-y the participant was feeling. Next, participants played the noise blast game. They were told they would compete in a reaction time game with their partner, and if they pressed the button first, their partner would get blasted with a loud noise. The participants themselves would decide how loud beforehand. Now, you and I both know that this was a sham, and every round ended in a draw. However, how loud the participants set the punishment noise was used to measure antisocial behavior. After the noise blast game, the participants played a modified version of the economic dictator game. In short, participants were told that they would be randomly assigned as the decider or receiver in a game of chance. The decider would then allocate 9 lottery tickets however they chose to themselves and the receiver. On the experimenter side, the participant was always chosen as the decider, and how many tickets they allocated to themselves and the confederate was used to measure prosocial and antisocial behavior. And finally, participants were asked if they were willing to rate photos for an unaffiliated study, and how many, up to 20. This task was used to assess prosocial behavior not specifically directed towards a social target. Now let's get into the results, but first manipulation checks. Participants in the high desire condition saw the confederate as more compatible, expressed more desire to get to know the confederate, and felt that the confederate wanted to get to know them more. Participants in the rejection condition also felt more rejected than in the control condition. And now the good stuff. All charts are my own creations based on information provided in the paper. Error bars represent 95% confidence intervals of the mean. None of the conditions significantly differed in how self-disclosure the participants felt. If we move on to the reaction time game, there were no significant differences in how painful the participants wanted the Confederates' failure to be. In the economic dictator game, there were no significant differences in how many tickets participants allocated to the Confederate. However, in the photo rating task, there was a significant two-way interaction between Confederate desire and rejection. However, when they broke that interaction down, the results weren't particularly convincing. And when you take into account that the authors conducted 32 significant tests, with no accounting for family-wise error rate, I chalk this up to sampling error. Put simply, when you do that many tests and don't account for the family-wise error rate, there's an 81% chance that you'll have at least one fluky result. Now, a lot of people in the scientific community have been questioning our use of statistical significance in talking about results. I'm going to skip a lot of the technical details, but the main thrust of the argument is that if you have a big enough sample size, any result will be significant. However, if it takes a sample size in the thousands to detect a minuscule effect, do we really care? As such, Sunami Nadzan and Jaremka did additional analyses on the effect sizes of their results to determine how small these effects really are. Based on the prior studies supporting the prospect of fulfilling belonging hypothesis, they estimated the smallest effect size of interest to be an effect that explains 17% of the variance in the outcome of interest. And here are the effect sizes for the results we've discussed to this point. I think we can confidently say these effects are in the don't care category. So what do we take from this study? Well, most obviously, this is a serious blow against the prospect of fulfilling belonging hypothesis. However, the authors do point to ways in which this theory might still have merit. It could be that you need a more potent rejection than this experiment's journaling task could deliver. It could also be that we might see a differentiation in responses to rejection when the target social partner has a more clearly defined and important role. For example, it could be that when people are rejected by a potential romantic partner, they could engage in prosocial behavior towards their close friends and antisocial behavior towards other potential romantic prospects. There is also the possibility that these results don't extend to marginalized groups. This study sample was exclusively white and almost entirely cisgender. I don't have data on sexual orientation or socioeconomic status, but it was an undergraduate sample. I've talked about the pros and cons of undergraduate samples in the past, so I won't rehash that here. However, I do think it's worth discussing the all-white issue. Basically, it's a trade-off between generalizability and experimental purity. The authors of this paper decided to isolate the race issue at the cost of generalizability. Feel free to argue about that decision in the comments. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.